Hi, hello. This is David and I'm Kersen. We are very happy you invited us for this presentation, which we have called Talk About Space. Talk About Space is a work by the American artist Ed Ruscha, you see it here. And we like Ed Ruscha very much. But apart from that, it's a very specific work. It's not the only one he made like that, but it's a work where he combines words and objects. So you see the word space, of which Ruscha says it's a word, so it has no scale, so it's as big or as wide as the canvas. And a pencil, you see there, of which he decided to depict it in real scale, as if the pencil measures the painting. And this idea that with very simple means you're able to measure something, measure space, who knows, and who knows even talk about it, that's something which really fascinates us. In 2005 we made a project, a competition project which we ultimately won for border crossing between Mexico and the United States in the desert. So here you see the desert, you see the Mexican part, you see a very, very big, small fragment there of the part of the States. It's both desert, it's undefined, maybe apart from the fact that the Mexican part is slightly bit more messy. A razor wire fence between two countries. The pedestrian crossing, as the question defined, was in essence nothing more, or that was what they asked us for, than a little box where people's passport is controlled, a bridge which crosses the razor wire fence without breaking it, and another box which controls your passport again. And as you can imagine, very often leaving a country is extremely easy, but entering another one is far more difficult. So in this extremely simple device, this infrastructural device with the bridge and the two boxes, in some way, and it's more reality than you can imagine, you have people ending up in the bridge in the bright sun for about a day. And we were wondering if it wasn't possible to make a project, to do a proposal of something which does not, in essence, change the questionable reality of passport control, but which brings to it another context. So the border garden, as we designed it, is an adobe wall of 9 meters high, which makes a garden of about 90 by 300 meters. The garden has palm trees. Because of its enclosed aspect, it can keep these palm trees. It's like, you see these oases in Zaap, which you dig for a well. You see the well there, more or less in the middle. You see the slightly dancing palm trees. You see on the right, lower side, for example, the pavilion which makes you enter the garden, so leave the country. You wait for 20 minutes or for a day, depending. And you finally manage, or you don't manage, to cross on the other side, to the other pavilion, left top side. And that's the whole idea, that's the procedure. Part of the question was also to incorporate in each side of the border a little library and a kind of little community center. We decided to incorporate them both in the garden, but not as a result of unity, but as double twins, like always two programs divided by a stair. You see a pavilion there and a pavilion there. So ultimately, when one crosses the border through this device, extremely simple, with the big opening on the side, one enters a wall which is even higher than the razor wire fence. And when one has ultimately crossed that border and come to who knows what could be considered as the promised land, one might realize that that promised land, here represented by Anastasiuskirche as the Garden of Eden, might have just been passed.
So, in a sense, you could say the picture or the painting Ed Rocher painted, Talk About Space, is a frame. Frame is something which interests us. A frame, and it's almost framing life as it is. The project Kirsten showed before of the Mexico-US border crossing is, of course, a very good example of that. This is a house, a realization we made in 2007 in Ghent, in Belgium. A house which you can see, well, it's in this mass drawing, it's in the city, it's in a row, it's the one in the middle which has the tree, let's say. When the client asked us to think about a renovation of the ground floor of that house, we saw an opportunity actually to make a new house. A new house which was completely, let's say, the complement of the existing house. The existing house is a house which is kind of a traditional Belgian house, but of a big size. It was formerly a children's school, but it was then, of course, being transformed in a house and so on. But what interested us was actually the garden, or the courtyard, you could say, which had been, during that amount of years, been transformed and added these typical back buildings and so on. And we actually stripped the whole plan of the garden or the court to make a new house of it. And actually, by defining two houses, we could, in our opinion, make a new universe which could complement to life in the original house, which is, let's say, daily life as it goes, but to put something next to that, a house which is almost you could say a summer house, a season house, a patio house, something which is slow in essence. It shows another world, and we really started to design it also as something extremely different, in the sense that it's being designed as its own universe. As you can see in the plan here, the drawing shows like a grid of tiles which were concrete tiles which had been already in the court, but which we rearranged to that rectangle, which was the defining size. Didn't fit really in the real situation, but that interested us. And by doing that, actually we decided also to make a new horizon, a new height, which defined the height of that new house. This is a view from the winter house, you could say, in the summer house. And actually the confrontation of these two, let's say, walking in from one to the other, the switch of universes was really the thing which was on our minds. Here you can almost see a facade, a rhythm of steel profiles, which is actually the whole perimeter of the house, surrounding this patch or this rectangle of concrete tiles. And that is the new patio house. The patio house is also defined by its perimeter being a green perimeter. It's a garden, and it is growing vines. So wherever you are in the summer house or the season house, you're surrounded by this modular system which holds basically Japanese vines, and these, of course, being a plant, are changing during the seasons. They become from, let's say, in spring they have very small little leaves. Summer they become very big green leaves, and in autumn they color from yellow to red, and eventually fall down, and then there's just the gray-brown branches of these vines. So, and that was also this kind of slowness was exactly what interested us. And how could it be something which doesn't need to be so comfortable as every house we know, let's say, traditionally or almost always is. So it just takes that consequence of these seasons. So also by making that, we just could close off the winter house from the summer house according to season, and we also introduced an almost immaterial line in the plan, which, as you can see here, but also here, which can control also, let's say, a little space of climate next to the winter house. So almost life can unfold and fall back into this house. And during the seasons, this is what really happens. So you could say furniture is spreading from under this little roof, which can protect you from rain and sun. But at the time, of course, that the weather gets better, as we have a day today here in Oslo, things start to move, and that's what really interested us. Basically, the house doesn't have any function, it's just completely empty. But then this emptiness is exactly what allows, again, different scenarios to happen. And of course, in all its choices of materialization, what interested us is the construction of this universe, almost the illusion of the immaterial of this line of glass, which you don't see here, and the columns with the reflective metal. The same thing with the rhythm of the profiles, and actually that you could also see that from its back. So you have actually, because of the figure not really fitting in that, let's say, plot of the court, you have these fringes, and also the fringes interest us. Actually, the backside is where you show the true nature of a project. It's almost exposing your construction, and that's what interested us. In a sense, you could walk around it almost. Well, you can only walk just past it, and there is also a little, let's say, niche which can hold the wood for fires, and which holds an open air kitchen, things like that. But actually, that there is things surrounding the house, not only the winter house, but actual other functions just beside, of course, defining the openness of the frame itself.
The jump from a house to a city is, of course, quite big. 2005 again, I think, for a new administrative capital in South Korea. And it's in many ways quite related to what David just explained before, in the sense that we try to investigate with this project to what extent you can still make a city or an urban plan, you could say, with architecture. And in proposing this, we presented, you could say, a city of 3.5 by 3.5 kilometers, built as a whole set of walls making rooms. The main idea about it is, of course, to avoid the trap of modernist cities built from scratch, like, you know, there is Brasilia or something, where everything is designed, and as soon as the workers who have built the city need a place to live, we have a problem. Here we thought it was maybe possible to design this framework of a city pretty much as an inverse idea of, you know, a grid like the Cerda grid in Barcelona or the grid of Manhattan, but a grid of buildings as a framework, buildings which only have 30 to 40% of what was the demanded program, which means that by definition 60% of this 500,000 inhabitants and all its functions around it will need to inhabit the empty spaces, the rooms. So with this very simple idea that you could say making a distinction between the big and the small unit, which is the small unit being that what fits in the wall and the big unit that what does not fit, you can in fact, if you think in terms of how a house or a space like this works, all of a sudden by adding different furniture, the space becomes different. So this very simple idea you see here represented in this framework of small unit-like walls which make rooms or spaces of 180 by 180 meters, rooms of spaces which are ultimately populated by the furniture of the buildings of this other 60%, buildings which in fact, or all kind of other things, which you can see here represented as these weird objects in the spaces. So, you know, you can imagine that something which fits in a 10-story high, because that was a very specific horizon which we had defined, because we thought it was important to give that city a kind of very stringent formal framework. In this 10-story high, between 12 and 13.5 meter wide buildings, there's things which fit, and all the other things, they do not fit, and yeah, they become objects or other things, or a slight little fragment of city fabric in between. Of course, to design a city with architecture, to design it with building, does not start from a naive idea that there's no transport. It's rather an idea that is based on the fact that if you design a city, let's say today, which is built in the next 20 years, it's a little bit, well, it's at least questionable to base that on the logic of transportation of now, knowing all kinds of questions about it. So in other words, we thought, you know, it's a perfect moment to present the opposite. Not forgetting about the way you could move around in such a city. You know, a city of 3.5 by 3.5 kilometers is roughly walkable. Still, you know, you can imagine metro or all kind of other trams to make shortcuts. You can see that here in that section. Ultimately, it is a city which is designed by that what in these perspectives you take away. So there's this fixed height, there's the fixed amount of dimensions which make the roofs. But the city life itself, life as it unfolds, it's here represented by all the vividness and the colorfulness of the collages. So we made a set of collages showing that what we were after, in which, let's say, the architecture or the framework of the city as such, we cut out. You see it here where, in a way, the infill becomes that big that it kind of inhabits the whole space, for example. Or you see it here where you see the cutout which defines the border between city and land. Because you have to understand that the proposal for a new administrative capital in South Korea was, of course, triggered by the idea to make, you could say, an anti-Seoul. And Seoul, the capital of Korea, being a sprawling city from a set of more or less specific centers which has no real border, the new city proposal has a very clear border and in fact develops from its border and has, from that formal engagement, you know, through city over citizenship, citizenship, brings in this notion of collective responsibility, who knows. But then again, we look at the images, and as I said before, and we use here as a reference image this beautiful collage by John Baldessari, where he makes crowds with shape of reason missing. Basically what it is all about is that these people in this collage are there because of, I don't know if it was the Pope or the King passing, but that's what he cut out. So you can imagine, or you can understand, our cutouts, our formal cutouts in that collage, but also in the plan, as an attempt to make the shape of reason, but ultimately to organize life without really interfering in it.
Again, a house, but this one is still a paper project. We don't know it will be built or not. It's in China, in Ordos. In a sense, I think it was 2007. We were invited by Ai Weiwei, who's now mysteriously vanished, and also Herzen Nummeron actually. They made a selection of 100 young architects. So, and each of these architects got a brief to make a villa 1,000 square meters. 1,000 square meters, not only quite already big as a program, but also in a master plan made by IWA, where these 1,000 square meters were positioned quite close to each other. And the master plan was in Ordos, which is Inner Mongolia, the north part of China, let's say. And we all, in a way, know what Mongolia is and not at the same time, of course. It's a very harsh place. It's a place where winters can drop down to -20, summers go up to 50 degrees. It's a desert-like situation. But still there's a city, of course, Ordos called, and a city of 2 million people. And there is extension of that city with a new whole city park being built, but this neighborhood would be, let's say, for the rich. That exists, of course, in China also. Anyway, a villa of 1,000 square meters within this context, as a question. What we proposed was actually something which considered that context. You could say, in a sense, that there's two conditions. There's, of course, the absurd condition of this 100 villas. Every young office practice wanting to make his own signature project. But then again, also it being in Ordos, which is an absurd situation on its own already. So our project, in a sense, wanted to keep low profile. This is an image from the outside. It's a wall in brick, with some openings, a stair going up, some strange trees sticking out, and a little box on top. I think the plan was very simple. In a sense, you have to imagine we got a program like a Bel Air villa with a big living room, the dining room twice, 2 kitchens, 2 garages, library, 7 or 8 bedrooms, the master bedroom, and so on. You know, everything in a big size. And we thought the ultimate luxury actually could be that you just organize all this program in one typology, one room of the same size, which you repeat basically. In this plan, you can see it 8 times. But ultimately, the villa was keeping a low profile because it was actually dug in the ground. And that was for the simple reason that it could profit from the let's say, constant temperature that the ground has, and be, in that sense, cooled in summer and a bit heated in winter, and could also, by organization of the rooms in this, let's say, rectangle, could integrate a patio, which becomes almost a microclimate for the whole house, and where all the rooms finally look at or look into, and are also confronted with each other. And as you can see also in the section, we made a slightly varying height, which got gradually bigger to the patio level at -2. So, I mean, after entering this almost low brick wall, you actually discovered the real space of the house, which was behind it and which was integrated in it, and showing actually its pure repetition and abundance of spaces, which we thought was the ultimate luxury of that house. And at the same time, and this is axonometric for you, which shows also that even stairs can be integrated in that sequence. So stairs going down, we're just using 2 corner rooms. I don't know if you can see this arrow. No, there's no arrow, but you can see it on the right image. And these were just stair rooms, and the rest were connected by that. And going through the plans, of course, you saw already the plan of the ground floor, but if you go down, then there's just a set of bedrooms and shared bathrooms, till ultimately you come to the lowest level, where there is the master bedroom, the master bathroom, everything master, gym, also and so on. And the patio on itself, of course, patio level, where we had to also put in a sauna, which we put outside in this space, something I think up here is very well known. Also even the pool was just a set of these rooms. So what interested us is just the simple gesture of making everything together, being unified in that one typology, being a room of 4 meters by 8 meters, and making a house or a villa of 1,000 square meters by organizing it like that. So ultimately it could end up giving perspectives from in this case, the library to the garage, or even an enfilade of rooms, which is the bedrooms, which weren't cleaned up at the time. And then of course also the pool. But what is actually the title of the project, finally, is, we called it 25 rooms. And 25 rooms, if you count really well, you have 3 floors of each 8 rooms, which makes 24. But that brings us back to the first image, actually. The program was also asking a servant's house. A servant's house, which was, I think, if I remember well, 30 square meters for the servant of that villa, of course. And actually by putting that on top of the house, and I can go back, of course it's a big way back, but here you can also see. It almost symbolized the gesture of the whole house, and it gave a very specific spot also for that person on the house, almost you could say as a watchtower, but he had also the view out. So in a sense it's ambiguous on how you see that, and of course as an exception almost, it shows the rule of the villa, which is essentially below.
In many ways, this house is family. Well, I guess every project is family, but this is even very close family to the Orlo's house. It's, as opposed to Orlo's house, it's a house we have just recently completed. It has certainly one item, one element in common, which I guess came through developing the Orlo's house, which was this fascination with making a house with all the same rooms. And here we are talking about 2 times 9 rooms, so 18 rooms, slightly smaller, square rooms also. And that was certainly something which, since the clients asked us to make a house in which they did not have a clear demand on how they would live in it. They thought maybe 2 bedrooms, maybe more, maybe the kids sleep separately, maybe they sleep together, maybe a living room, maybe not, maybe a study, maybe not. And they thought, you know, it's okay, we're flexible. And you know, is it possible to make an extremely unflexible house for a flexible way of using it? So that was certainly one thought. A second thought, which maybe you can see the best on this drawing, is maybe a more contextual one, which I don't know to what extent that's applicable here to Norway, but in Belgium you have amongst many people this desire to build their own house, and there's not so much space, and there's some rules, although rules are often fucked up. But one of these results of that is that there's a lot of small plots which people buy, and they pay a lot of money for them, and in that they can build their own villa. Well, they call it a villa, but in fact it's a house, and it has always very little space around it. In this particular case, you see left and right from our house, so our house including 3 plots, slightly bit below another black spot there, which is in fact a farmhouse of a farmer, not a very beautiful one. But this farmer, he decided one day he could make money, and he could divide his plot and divide it into 3 other plots and sell them, and he sold them in 10 minutes. Because people are really hunting for it. And our clients were second, so they had more or less a second spot. And they were lucky in the sense that often you have these plots multiplied everywhere around, a bit like in the order situation, but here in the back of the house there's a forest and it will stay like that, and in the front of the house there is a piece of agricultural land, and I mean the idea is also that it will stay like that. So despite these bizarre neighbors left and right, so buildings which are built simultaneously with our house, there's nothing. So that's another aspect of the building. So this typical, I would say, maybe not so typical, but let's say common situation of building in an allotment where the border between you and the neighbor becomes super fundamental. The border becomes a fence, the neighbor stands on the fence, you know. And so, although a villa maybe ultimately had the notion of living alone in the wilderness or in the landscape, you're always living with your neighbor. So we thought, is it possible to move the border, the frame, the hedge, the fence, from the line you see between the neighbors to being part of the house? So can we make the fence part of the house? In other words, almost as a gesture of ultimate luxury, saying we have the house, we have the garden on top and below, and all the rest, over time of course, not yet on the pictures now, is wilderness. We give it away. So between us and the neighbor there's wilderness. Very small patch of wilderness, but wilderness nevertheless. So here you see that idea. There's the house with its equal rooms. There's the fence, which becomes part of the house, becomes part of the form of the house. And well, it's very gentle wilderness with the flowers here, but it's wilderness. Maybe third element is we wanted to make a house which is at the same time, and that's something which comes back, and finished with this kind of bitumen plastic of roof structure, following the same rhythm of the structure of the grid of the frame of the fence, and below a mineral house, finally built in brick to be painted white, not entirely yet, which is, you could say, a smaller house in winter. It's only a kitchen and a table to eat, and in summer it's the full 9 squares being part of that garden. So here you see the garden plan, or the 0 level. You see in front and in the back, or the opposite way around, you see the gardens, almost like patios to the house, the gardens of the house. You see this fence, you see the 9 rooms, of which only the middle rooms, there's a stair above and below, there's a table and a kitchen. There's on the right side for you, there's a storage kind of built in as a wooden box in that house, and on the left side there's an entrance space. But all the other spaces, including the entrance space, are just covered, not insulated, no real closure, only a roof. The roof, which is ultimately the floor of the winter house. At the same time, you see also that fence being part of the house makes this space around it where the car can park. So typically you have a parking in front of the house on the street, you have the entrance, that place and so forth. We wanted to break that sequence as if the house has another orientation. So left and right of the house, there's the doors, front door, back door, or the opposite way around. The cars park in this leftover space, which is a space where you cannot build between you and the neighbors in that piece of wilderness, and ultimately they can drive around if you would like to do that. The top house is this wooden house, as we said. The stair in the middle brings you up, and then the other 8 rooms, which are left and right from the stair, 2 bathrooms and rooms. I mean, here you have a possible infill with a couple of beds and a couple of tables, but they're even using it differently now. So this is like 3 pictures of the house in winter. It was in, I think, January, because it was snowing a lot in Belgium, at least for Belgians. You see left and right, so first the neighbor 1, who was built simultaneously, our house, and then the second neighbor. You see the fence, of course, you see the plastic of the second floor. You see these sliding windows. I didn't mention them, but they're kind of important to us in the sense that there's only these windows to either the landscape, the open landscape, or the forest. But the windows are conceived as openings from the inside, so the frames are put such a way that you never see them. Either the windows are completely open, or they're completely closed, but even then it looks like just glass. Below we do the same with a much bigger stainless steel or galvanized steel window. You see it here again? Oh, And you see indeed a view from the kitchen, where you see that that window is just it's invisible. And then you see a couple of images of last week, because they've been now doing the, well, let's say the landscape. Yeah, you don't see much about it, but okay. They will still put the trees. I mean, they're finalizing it. It will only happen in September. And let's just show it as a sequence. You see the frame, where you see the lower part, the top part, yes. Again, and again. You see also that, you know, in order to make the windows completely disappear on the top, as soon as they open, they cantilever, so that, yeah, you see nothing. I mean, if they close, you don't see the frame, because, of course, the frame is just over the bitumen and not over the opening. But when they open, you don't see them again. So the bricks are supposed to be painted, but they're not yet. And the plants of the fence have just been planted, but we asked our clients to prove, and they showed us a picture, and it's true, but we don't see it. Yeah. So here you see this in between space, and you see that in the end our fence, the fence of the house, becomes much bigger than the fence which obviously the neighbor can put here on the right side. Now here you see they started painting. And when you go the last picture upstairs, where you see the complete wooden universe, just with yeah, devices.
Okay, from projects of rooms, I would say, almost to another project. This is we were asked to join a competition for the Belgian Pavilion in Venice, the Biennale of 2008, and we won the competition to make actually an intervention on the Belgian Pavilion for that year, the Arkitekturbiennalen. So, but what was asked actually in that competition is how could you show architecture? It's maybe a strange question to start from, but actually it's quite essential in the sense that in a biennale on architecture could be quite relevant to think about how to show architecture. Because in the end, it's biennales can be quite like overwhelming in showing representations of architecture and not real experienceable architecture on itself. So what we actually decided to do was not to work on the Belgian Pavilion itself, but to work outside the Belgian Pavilion. The Belgian Pavilion was actually, of course, the starting point and our terrain we could work on and in actually. So that as a starting point, as an idea, a pavilion which is one of the first pavilions in the Giardini. It's built in 1907. So as a starting point of doing something spatial there. Our intervention, as you can see here, well, actually it's the top pavilion, which is a bit like a strange cross, next to the Spanish pavilion, the Dutch pavilion, and the big black spot on the right side is the Italian pavilion, the main Giardini pavilion, where the axis of the Giardini leads to. So the Belgian pavilion was a bit strange in an angle towards that axis. And we decided to reframe it, to make actually, to propose, this is, maybe I should go back, to propose to put something around it, a wall. We use this as a reference image or picture. It's a picture by Thomas de Mand. Actually it shows, as in all his pictures almost, it shows empty architecture. It shows a place abandoned, in this case a children's party, just after the party. Something that actually also started to trigger us, the idea of after the party there is just what's left is basically architecture. And in our idea, as you can see here, we reframed the Belgian pavilion with this construction. This is already a worked out drawing, which was a bit different from the original competition drawing. But this is how finally we could manage to materialize our gesture, our idea, or our new pavilion for the Venice Biennale 2008. Because basically what it does is it shows a new Belgian pavilion for 2008, and it reframes the old pavilion as being almost a piece of architecture. This is an image from the outside. As you can see in the plan already, we were very, let's say, conscious in designing the pavilion, the new pavilion, because in our idea, this could not look as something temporary, something which becomes like event architecture, something that doesn't interest us. It was really a piece of architecture which was designed in detail, which is modular, which is made out of real materials. But of course, in the end, actually a scaffolding system in Italy, a very beautiful one, Italian scaffolding. Everything in Italy is more beautiful, of course. And we could redesign it actually as a modular system, actually allowing us to make a wall which could be self-supportive, which could stand 7 meters high, which could be 20 or I think 30 meters long in that side, and which in the end could become actually the pavilion, the new frame, the new Belgian pavilion for 2008. Also structurally this had to be calculated for winds and so on. But finally it gives actually a very crucial spatial experience. As in the picture you saw before, you saw the little hall which was the actual entrance of the new pavilion. It was standing on a little side road next to the access going to the Italian pavilion, and it allowed actually visitors to enter this the inside of this wall as almost a strange niche, almost alienating you from the context of the Biennale and transporting you to the back side of the pavilion. A strange little back door that maybe, if you have noticed the plan, there was a little side door on the right, and there you could enter also the pavilion. It's the back entrance, basically, it's service entrance. So after walking through this, you came in the original pavilion. Something which was, of course, again, strange as an experience, and as we didn't really want to exhibit architecture as a representation, we just said we'd show the pavilion how it is. Just today, after 100 years of transformations, it's just basically a white box with some roof lights, and we took off the protective film of the roof lights to have natural daylight in the existing spaces. And what was of course already puzzling was that there was a layer of confetti on the floor and some chairs scattered around. This is the confetti. And actually, finally, you understand when you then walk out, after walking inside this pavilion, walk out the original entrance of the Belgian pavilion, which you can see here on the right side, that this wall, or this metal structure you just were passing, was actually a wall, framing or reframing the Belgian pavilion, almost exhibiting, and at that same gesture making a new sequence of spaces of it, and creating a patio around it, which ultimately just shows, you could say, the generosity of space itself. You could just sit there, enjoy the sun, drink some water, and finally it was just unified by one layer of confetti. And why confetti? It's a strange story maybe, but it's almost as a practical solution to a problem of we needed something to cover equally the ground in and out, and after some tries with other ideas and materials, we thought, like, let's just throw confetti. It's something which is easy to do, you can cover in and outside, and at the same time it gave the second layer, the second interpretation, which is super important also for the project. It's the title, which came after after the party. After the party, you could almost say, is the party the pavilion never had its 100th birthday, which was the year before in 2007.
I guess gradually this project of the Biennale gave us also another insight. And it was that until, I guess more or less, until that moment we were making often very specific spatial definitions, frames of spaces, who knows, through making a complete intervention. You know, in houses we show rooms, and the house we showed before, the Biennale, shows this big perimeter, which is a fence, things like that. In some way, the Biennale project gave us an insight which we thought was very interesting, that it was in fact possible to make an L-shaped like intervention and somehow still have the same effect. So it wasn't really necessary to complete the perimeter. And that was intriguing. So when we did this competition for this office building, Chamber of Commerce, we were playing with that idea, I guess. That was one aspect of it. At the same time, of course, it was a very pragmatic competition. It was a competition for an office building for the Chamber of Commerce. So it's a program which is at the same time extremely pragmatic. It's people work. But it's also very representative. It's a Chamber of Commerce, so people who come and visit them, although they do that not too often, they have to see them working, or they have to see the kind of idea of what the Chamber of Commerce could be like.
And so when again this complex had to expand, the city of Kortrijk asked us to make a master plan, because it couldn't keep on growing. This is a site which already is quite congested, has problems of parkings, of the public and so on, and there was a need for a thought on this area. So how to deal with such an area which is basically only backsides, it's boxes and docking stations for trucks, cars going for wherever, and so on. This is for us also a reference. It's a painting by George van Tongelo, a Belgian version of, let's say, Piet Mondriaan. At the same time, typical the style compositions of squares and rectangles within the frame of the painting. What interested us specifically on this work is that the frame was made quite clumsy. It's a bit thick, you could say. But at the same time, so the focus is almost the frame in this case. But at the same time, it shows a frame around, let's say, spaces, boxes. And actually, we made a master plan which almost takes that as a reference, but takes that very serious. The existing huge halls of this complex, you can see trucks and parking places. It's quite gigantic. I think it's more than 80,000 square meters. Our idea is that the only thing this needed was actually a frame where suddenly there was a clear idea on what is inside, what is outside, and of course which reorganized the whole complex as almost a city which has a city wall. We almost compared it with the Medina, as you have them in North African cities, the old city wall capturing what is in and out, and I'm making, because of doing that, hierarchy. So making that frame actually allowed us to also talk about it and suddenly say, this is expo, this is not, this is parking, this is public, this is green, this is not green. The frame was actually a real spatial divide for definition. Definition of such a complex, of an extreme big scale towards a visitor who has almost no overview on such a thing. And what is intriguing is that the complex is actually built on a grid with one size. The architect building it for 30 years already, or 40, decided at the time to build it on a grid of 570 by 570, and which is of course like a rational decision. But that rationalism wasn't really so clear in the plan, because actually that grid was not visible. And we were intrigued by that grid, actually, by the grid that organized that system of boxes. Could that also be actually the real facade of such a complex? So our proposal was actually to make a very big gallery, a gallery for pedestrians around the whole site, which could orient also every pedestrian, because fundamentally this is an area where cars come and then people start to walk and buses stop, and thousands of people visit these kind of exhibitions of various kinds. This needed a clear frame, but also a clear pedestrian road. This pedestrian road was the gallery. The gallery was actually made by one detail. It was a white column, a white painted steel column, put exactly at the coordinates of the, let's say, grid, which was invisible in these boxes because of facades being added and so on. But these were exactly put on the axes of this grid, which led into detailing of such a whole complex, and I will show you later, but there's also a building taking up that system. But basically, the idea of maybe even going back to the painting we showed in the beginning of Ed Rocher is the idea of measuring such a complex. The measurement was actually already there. It was a grid, it was 570, we just had to show it. So, in Kortrijk, things go very fast, and we got actually from a master plan idea immediately to be the architect, co-architect, I would say, because the house architect was still involved. We got to be the co-architect of the whole gallery and the whole project. The whole project, which involved actually also a lot of clearing of terrain, flattening of the area, new office building, a new hall, as I told you in the beginning, and of course organization of logistic space in general. And for us, that frame was exactly the tool in thinking all this pragmatism on the side. And in a strange way, the client also saw that like that this could be actually also suddenly organizing that, and something that you could say which is essentially not really necessary, I mean a gallery around something, could suddenly become actually the image of such a complex. Here you can see the perspectives it gives, and also in a way it is a gallery that opens itself towards the city, towards the green area, which it cuts away from the logistic area. And there is a kind of steel or metal mesh, which you can also see slightly here, curtains in steel, woven steel, which hang in the inside of the gallery, actually making almost a screen or something like a filter to the inside of this complex. A filter that could, of course, still be very pragmatic, and be very usable, but at the same time showing its ambivalence within this context. And at the same time, of course, this gallery was a clear line between what is, you could say, par and what is logistics, which is translated in green and asphalt. The inside of the gallery was a concrete way. So again, here I think not to become repetitive on that, but every project has this notion of I would say, the economy of means, to do with little a lot. I think that's something we like to really investigate. And suddenly there had to be also an office building and an entrance hall which had to be replaced and so on. And there we decided actually this, since it's the entrance of the hall, also just follows the public routing, becomes almost an extension of this gallery, goes into that inside of the complex, into the Medina, to attach itself to the main circulation of that complex. And an office building, which below became an entrance hall, can become on top just, let's say, the organization, the space for offices, people organizing the big fairs happening up there. And as a strange thought, we thought like, okay, that could be actually the head or the entrance gate for the whole system. The whole system showing, again, its own proportional system, but then introducing even office space in that. And as a strange effect that gave that the three floors of offices, we fitted them in two of the modules of 570 by 570. So again, almost revealing as an accident, you could say, this maybe in the first place absurd measure system, but by just showing it, you could give actually a facade to it. And make, you could say, almost a mediator between the visitor and such a complex.
To finish, maybe that sounds surprising, but when we were doing this project in the Expo, I think gradually we realized, and it was maybe not the first time, but we realized more and more that, as David just said, we have an enormous impact with doing less and less, or very little intervention to give an existing building a twist. We were asked last year by Sana and Sejima to be part of the international section of the Biennale in Venice again, and that was a bit weird for us because we were in, well, let's say representing Belgium 2 years earlier, and of course, as much as it felt like something really nice to do, it also felt like a bit of a possible trap, because what could we do after having done the confetti pavilion, let's say, which was either similar or maybe we had no clue. At the same time, of course, with much smaller budgets. I mean, this international section works very differently than the national section. But then, in some bizarre way, there was an interesting condition to the Biennale contribution of ours, which was she gave us this small building you see there in the middle of the image, with 7 rooms, a pavilion, in the very, very far end of the Arsenal, of which we are convinced that only 20% of the visitors saw it, because it's so far. You must be really big fan of architecture to get there. Nevertheless, it was just in the back of a beautiful garden done by Piet Oudolf, Dutch, what would you call him? Garden man, in the sense that he's planting beautiful plants, and like he did in the Highline, he was responsible for all the planting, but he doesn't really consider himself a garden designer. He kind of, it's as if he's painting with plants. So we were lucky, we thought, that we had such a specific condition. We had this pavilion, which was never used until last year as a space to show things, and we had the garden. So we thought it was evident we were not going to do another intervention. We thought, let's do something else. Let's show something which maybe indirectly we had been carrying along for a long time, but we never made so explicit. We asked our very good friend Bas Prinsen, of who you see a picture here, but in fact of who you've seen a lot of pictures until now, because all the pictures, apart from the snapshots of the house with the fence, are all by him. It's a very good photographer who we had the luck to collaborate with, in the sense that he never takes pictures really of architecture as documentation, but he just takes pictures as autonomous work. And so this kind of parallel track over 7-8 years had been extremely inspiring. So he makes work, we make collages, and of course there never been, maybe apart from one project which we didn't show today, a direct link, I mean that we did it really together, but since we meet each other very regularly, like weekly or second weekly basis, there is an obvious echo. So we thought it was a great idea to show architecture through perspective. On the one hand, constructed architecture, you could say, in the framing of the photographer Bas Prinsen. On the other hand, the imaginary, but also somehow constructed, and sometimes later really constructed architecture of the collages of ours. So, in order I mean, we decided very simply to use these 7 rooms to show the work, to show always one or maybe 2 projects in each, or no, I better say 1 or 2 duos or couples of perspective of ours, a collage, and a picture of Bas in each of these rooms. And while doing that, we realized that in a bizarre way we needed again an architectonic intervention to make it happen. We had the garden is nice, but then the rooms always have these doors in the front, and you have to enter a room, you have to leave a room, enter a room. We were kind of convinced if we wouldn't do anything, people would go to one room and get bored and walk away. So we thought maybe we need to kind of connect the rooms. So we thought we needed a device somewhere between an extra hallway, a hallway which would make access to the rooms, a porch maybe, like, and something which would mediate between the garden, and ultimately even something which would make the building, which is just a storage building, visible. So these 3 elements brought us to this thing you see, which is half the size, I mean it's as long, but half the width of the existing building, which we put in front, like a porch-like structure, very simple, white steel structure, you will see, with a kind of roof made out of a mesh, a kind of woven tissue, which would serve that all these demands. And you see that the garden partly walks into that room, or it's partly part of that room, and it's partly, of course, just building. So here you see again a picture of Bas Prinsen, this time not, I mean, this time a picture of the project. So, and you see indeed that you have the garden entering the room, you have the floor which we cleaned up, of course. Let's say the mise en scène is that we kept it like it was, but we had to clean it up, so to clean up the pebbles and things. And you see that the trees are gradually eating themselves into that roof of the pavilion. And here you see that indeed that pavilion as such, with this very, in a way, simple columns. I mean, they look very skinny, but they just work. You know, it's economy of needs, right? So this simple steel structure, painted white, together with the doors, which were in the original building, which we took out, we painted white again, and together with the panels, which I think you can see in the next image, which we painted white again, and on which we printed either our images, our perspectives, and Bas's image, or our attempt to, let's say, turn this building, it's always been there, into architecture. I mean, very simply, like you populate it, you add some elements in the same kind, and all of a sudden it becomes a garden pavilion.
Yeah, and what was very important also is, of course, the work showed actually collages, as Kerstin already explained, in confrontation with these pictures. Bas takes all over the world, and also collages of projects here, as we saw in the beginning of the project in Korea. I mean, and in a strange way, we found these rooms made frames and couples, and you could visit such an exhibition and see almost dreams of architecture through collages, which we of course made, but then again also dreams of architecture through photography, the pictures Bas takes, and these two, you could say, could easily relate and could, in that sense, you could say Bas finds in his world journeys spaces which are just there and reconstruct them, but from scratch on paper, but in a strange way, both are very similar. So again, the picture of Bas, which he took somewhere in China, I think, which he called Grid 2, I think, legs of some bridge or other structure standing in a very dirty area somewhere. But this abstraction, the idea of wilderness, and these two together, I think it's something in our work which really is interesting us. And of course, the idea of the abstract, the measure, and again, the idea of life and wilderness again, come together, and this is of course related, and this shows again that research, as we could show it, and finally Bas takes this picture in the end of the pavilion as we build it there, really by our own hands because of the lack of budgets. But anyway, it is something which for us tells a lot about architecture. Even a picture can again make almost a collage of something you intended. Thank you.